Oxford Road, even Oak Park in Bernie, and you can see the devastation of Oak Wilt. So I'm super excited to have a local, board certified, full service arborist to share his knowledge on what we can do to make our trees healthy and how we can help prevent oak wilt. So please welcome Arborist Kevin Belter.
So my name is Kevin Belter. Back in 2007, I started ArborCare and Consulting, and I'm a board certified master arborist. It's the International Society of Arboriculture, huge organization, has a certification process, and the final achievement is that BCMA title. The Texas Forest Service and the ISA have put together a program of qualification for oak wilt. I was in the very first class on that, so I've been engaged in it heavily for over 15 years. What we're going to cover tonight is just one aspect of oak wilt, and but it's a very dear to my heart aspect. Predominantly, we're going to talk about white oaks and oak wilt. I kind of see them as like the forgotten oaks in the whole plan of oak wilt management. In my website, I have designed as a resource in my campaign to better help manage oak wilt. It's got tons of information on it. Down here at the bottom, you see all my qualifications, and then there's a link to my YouTube, and I've got about 100 videos on there. This oak wilt menu, what is oak wilt? Identifying the signs of oak wilt, and under that one I've got symptoms of live oak, symptoms of red oak, and symptoms in the white oak family. In that particular aspect, there's no symptomology whatsoever provided by the Texas Forest Service or Texas AgriLife. Wow. So this is a huge aspect that needs more science and more representation so that we can also take care of them when they get sick. False symptoms of oak wilt. Oak wilt resistant, which is, we're going to be on that page a lot today. Oak wilt diagnostics. There's been major advancements in diagnostics, including DNA. So this is very, very high tech. Started a couple of years ago, and the integration of that DNA testing is going to make major changes in oak wilt management knowledge and practices. How does oak wilt spread? This one is just a huge section on oak wilt management. So my campaign, the state of Texas, with a lot of federal money, has a program called the Texas Oak Wilt Suppression Program, and they're really battling with this disease, but the impact that they're having is extremely negligible compared to the expansion and destruction of the disease. So we need to find ways to be more effective, and I'm very much the optimist. I believe if there's a will, there's a way. And so you're gonna see me representing that a lot. So the cost of oak wilt treatment, a lot of times I hear that it's extremely expensive. In consideration of the value of the loss, it's actually a lot less expensive than you might think. Oak Wilt facts, and then this one is a very unique one. So I'm engaged in my program. For me to make impact with the people running the Texas Oak Wilt Suppression Program, I need to gather more information from them and help them see the areas that they can work on more. So there's some very interesting information on that page.
What is the website you're looking at?
My website is ArborCare and Consulting.com.
Did you happen to bring cards?
Oh, you know what? I forgot to mention. I have handouts of cards and an outline of the presentation.
Did you have a card already?
So real briefly, what is Oak Wilt? Oak Wilt is a disease of the beech family. So that includes chestnuts too. It's not just oaks. Oaks are in the beech family. The entire beech family is afflicted. But you know, it's predominantly oak because of the amount of number of oak and the issues with transference that oaks provide with fungal mats and root grass. But oak wilt is a vascular wilt disease caused by a fungus that parasitically feeds on the sugars and starches created by the tree, and it colonizes and clogs the water-conducting xylem vessels of the trees in the beech family. This is a map from 2016 provided by the USDA Forest Service of all the counties in the United States with oak wilt. So we're right in here, but comparatively red versus red, we're just a small component of the entire range of this disease, and it's absolutely devastating. Especially here in Texas. So in Central Texas, oak wilt is more ravaging and damaging than anywhere else in the nation because of a lot of factors, but it's predominantly the root graft situation, especially with our live oaks and the fact that our soil level's not quite as deep, and so the probability of root grafts are much higher here. And so, for example, I am seeing routine, repetitive movement from live oaks to Spanish red oaks to lacy oaks and various other white oak family. So what's uncommon is them not to be grafted here locally. So I manage oak wilt on thousands of acres for hundreds of miles. So I get around a lot and I see what the disease is actually doing on raw land, native established trees, day in, day out. And I spend most of my time in the field, and not as much time as I probably should in the office kind of thing. But so this is a foundational quote from the Texas Forest Service on the Texas Forest Service's main website for oak wilt, and that's texasoakwilt.org. And this is their introduction page. The successful management of oak wilt depends on correct diagnosis and understanding of how the pathogen and different oak species interact. So what we're going to be covering is how white oaks and other oaks interact with each other and how the fungus affects these white oak species. Here's a fact sheet from the Texas AgriLife Extension. Again, the AgriLife Extension is part of the Texas A&M University system and also funded by the state of Texas. So it's a government entity. You can do public information requests and get records from and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with the Texas Forest Service. They work in conjunction. A lot of the research being done is being done by the Texas A&M University system and predominantly a man named Dr. David Apple. And he probably is in the top 5, maybe even the number 2 most published researcher on Oak Wilt in the nation ever. So this is the concerning thing, okay? We've got a list of resistant white oak tree species. Post oak, bur oak, Mexican white oak, white shin oak, lacy oak, Chinquapin oak, and by extension, the white shin oak, which there's a lot of that here in Cordillera, is Quercus sinuata very breviloba. And then there's another tree. There's another tree called the Durand oak. And it's just a Quercus sinuata. So it's basically the same thing as this one. But these are the main white oaks. And so, the question is what has been the position on those oak species and oak wilt? There's a website called Web Archive where you can go and look at websites from a long time ago and the information on them, which is very helpful when you're doing a historical conditioning on particular topics, such as this one. So, fall 2003, white oaks are resistant to the fungus and rarely die from oak wilt. That's texasoakwilt.org. The main website of the Texas Forest Service. So they have their main website and then they got their Oak Wilt website. On their main website, they say oaks in the white oak group are the least susceptible and tend to resist the disease. The trees will generally survive with little noticeable impact.
And what's that one site if you don't mind?
It's it's on this sheet here, I think. TFS Web, TAMU, EDU, Oak Wilt
Got
Facts.
it. Thank you.
What I was reading from though is years prior to today. So I got that off of the Web Archive. What I'm going to show you is after I started my campaign, they got a hold of my website and saw what I was publishing, and I had numerous phone calls with them and with AgriLife agents. Within a month, probably less than a month, changes to their main website and texasoakwilt.org happened, and they were pretty substantial and pretty concerning, but good because now they're getting closer to what's the truth. So this is Dr. Apple. So we have this thing called the Texas Oak Wilt Qualification Course for arborists like me, so we can get trained to know what the truth is about oak wilt, and then go and service oak wilt and teach people, etc. Right? So this is part of and this was taken from his 2019 summer last Texas Oak Wilt qualification course presentation outline, which is available on the ISA Texas website. Almost all my images, you can just click them on my website. It'll take you to where it came from. I have a more than enough adequate representation of every claim I'm making on my website. It was very critical because I'm dealing with professors and the experts in the state here. So that's why I made my website the way I did. But he's got white oaks equal resistant, and then he basically lists all of them right there. So the question is, how are they defining resistant? Right? They're saying that they're resistant, but what resistant mean? Well, from the quotes, they're talking about, they're saying that they rarely die and there's little noticeable impact. Well, the question is that true? They rarely die and there's little noticeable impact.
What are the oaks down Kreisberg?
Yeah.
Predominantly live oak, but there's some Chinook in there, and I'm sure I could go in there and show some Chinooks that have died of oak wilt. Most of the time they go unnoticed though. It's because of the message. If you don't know to look for it, you're not going to look for it. That's the key thing, is we need to know that we need to look at our white oaks and how they're doing.
So I heard that the bark on part of the tree is starting to fall off. That's one sign. And then I heard that there's treatment that you can do on the roof.
So this is, again, this is from the Internet Archive website. I found this update. It's an oak wilt update produced by the Texas Forest Service. They have it on their main website, but it's an oak wilt update. They never put it, even to this day, on their oak wilt website. This is from 2015. So that's 5 years ago. This is what they were saying. Okay? Right here. However, those white oaks, such as the Chinook, Chinquapin oak, and lacy oak, that grow in stands with interconnected root systems, also may die in large numbers. So die in large numbers and little noticeable impact, I just can't seem to, get the head around how both of those are true. So the question is, what is true and where did this come from? Well, I did a public information request. I did 2 of them. I asked, who wrote this? Who authorized that this get written? And who authorized it getting published on the main website? My response back from them, no responsive information. So they have no idea who wrote it or published it or anything, which is, kind of concerning because I'd really like to know. I think it's important information, and whoever published it, they probably have other important information. They can answer some questions, but since I don't know who they are, I can't ask any more questions. It just got no responsive information. So, after my little campaign here, what did they have on their website on texasoakwilt.org? Now, November 9th, updated message. Most infected white oaks, for some reason they changed back to many a month later after I took this screenshot. So now it says many infected white oaks. Why they went from, major change to most and then back to many, I don't know. But they say many infected white oaks will exhibit some canopy loss, and generally the disease will not spread to adjacent trees. lacy oaks, white shin oaks, and Chinquapin oaks sometimes form root connections similar to live oaks, offering a pathway for the disease to spread to adjacent trees, causing higher infection and mortality rates than in other white oak species. Now that's not saying the same thing as they said before, can die in large numbers. Dying in large numbers is what live oaks do. They die in large numbers. That's called a mortality center. In professional terminology, that's what we call a mortality center, dying in large numbers. So they're saying that they can cause higher infection and mortality rates, but it really kind of begs the question, well, how high? Right? So if you have a 1% mortality rate, that's not very bad. Well, 2% is higher than 1%, right? So it's like, how high is it? You know, I think that's important information. Like, how serious are we supposed to take this? So why they didn't just include the exact 2015 terminology and put it here, I ain't got a response on that yet. But I can tell you in 2 other places they did a little bit more thorough job on the update. So this is their main website as of December. Oaks in the white oak group are the most tolerant of the disease, with variations among the group depending upon species. Post oak, bur oak, and Mexican white oak are very tolerant of the disease. That's not true, and we're gonna handle that here in a minute. But they do say these species may exhibit some canopy loss, but rarely die when infected. Then they go on to say white shin oak, Chinquapin oak, and lacy oak can grow in stands with interconnected root systems, enabling the fungus to infect adjacent trees. These species are more tolerant of the disease than the red or the live oak, and usually survive infection with moderate to severe canopy loss, but they can die in large numbers from the disease. So, you know, substantial change from little noticeable impact to 3 of the 6 listed are now dying in large numbers possibly. What I don't get is, you know, how you can have usually survive, usually means more often than not they're going to survive. But if you're saying they also die in large numbers from the disease, like what's large number, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking like low number is less than a moderate number. A moderate number is like 45 to 55, somewhere in that range, you know, about medium, halfway. And then large would be at least 51%. And usually would be 51%. So that's 102%. So the math just don't even add up there. Right? So, you know, it's questionable. Like, where are they getting all this information to substantiate? What's the science behind the policy and the new adjustment? So, public information request. I go, I say, okay, you guys updated your website. I'd like to have the documents that y'all utilized in order to make your new policy changes so I can evaluate it. And then they come back with, let's see here. No responsive information. So, you know, I'm just not sure, you know, like how that happens that you don't have scientific documents for scientific policies. But it's concerning to me. So,
does your treatment of oak wilt differ this much from the states?
yeah, we're gonna get to that here in a minute. So I don't know what kind of impact this has had, but it is a substantial and a very unique case study. Okay, if you Google Lacey Oak Wilt lawsuit, there was a lawsuit regarding Oak Wilt and Lacey Oaks that occurred in Kerr County. And as a result, it went to a federal court in Bear County. Okay? We all know lawsuits impact what people do and don't do, and then there's some fear associated with that. You know, like if you don't know, and because you don't know a certain bit of knowledge, you feel like, well, maybe I'm under the gun right now. Okay? I can tell you a Texas forester found in 2001 Lacey Oak Wilt mortality centers. Massive amounts of them dying on this property. Okay, they tried to treat them. It didn't work well. Lawsuit came about. This thing dragged on for like 7 years or so. Okay, there's a letter, and I have that letter from the Texas Forest Service that was used as evidence in the lawsuit. Okay, so did that maybe have an impact? You know, maybe the Forest Service worried about getting sued. I don't know, but what I do know is that an actual forester who was Arborist of the Year this year, okay, is an awesome guy named Mark Dove, was aware, and he was the principal Oak Wilt guy for the Forest Service on the ground, working all these counties in the hill country, and he knew about Lacey Oak mortality centers in 2001. And it's not until I become a little pest and bug them that they make the change in November of 2019. That's a long time to be knowing and having field observations. Maybe you don't have the science. And I do have proof they have no science right now. Okay, so what they do have is they have field observations. That's where they made these changes. That first 2015 Oak Wilt update, I'm almost certain it's Mark Duff. And I asked them specifically, and they told me they had no responsive information. But I do know a good bit of people in the Forest Service as well as people in my industry. And the general consensus is that it was predominantly him seeing these Chinquapins and Shin Oaks, Lacey Oaks dying in large numbers. And that's how that update got on their main website. But what I don't understand is why that wouldn't get put on texasoakwilt.org. Why did it take from 2001 to 2015 to even get an update like that on their website? And all the while, this is what's going on during that time frame that's extremely concerning to me. Okay, we have the Chinquapin oak, and we have the Lacey oak as Texas superstar trees. To become a Texas superstar plant, whether you're a grass or you're a shrub or you're a tree, you have to meet all these requirements. Can it be grown throughout the state, and is it basically disease and pest free? I.e. meaning the Texas consumer can invest in this tree and not have to worry about them dying in large numbers, right? And so it's really hard to get on this Texas Superstar plant list. They talk about how they studied these trees for 7 years in trials throughout the state to make sure that they were worthy of the designation. And both of them are on their die in large numbers new update on the Texas Forest Service website. So this is concerning because I don't want so many Texas consumers believing that resistant means it's going to be barely affected, and then they die and end up dying in large numbers, and then we have the same thing happening that's happening to our live oaks, where they're all dying, and then we're planting these white oaks expecting them to do well. When they get big and mature and get oak wilt, they're all going to go again. Yeah. That's creating a secondary epidemic. You know, so that's the last thing we want to do when we've got barely any control over this disease as it is. So going on to the ones that they have said that are very resistant. Okay, so I'm working off of field observations. in DNA testing. So I take samples from these trees before they get on my website, and I start saying stuff about them. I want to make sure I got the science on it. Okay, so I take cuttings and I send it overnight to these guys that had DNA testing, and they find the actual DNA of the fungus in the tree or not in the tree. And I send them multiple samples per tree. I don't mess around. I'm going to get some like significant, like I can count on this, right? So this is
Can I ask, do we know, does Cordillera have like an arborist on staff to know how we're doing in this category?
That's a good
That's a good
question.
They have suggestions in the newsletter, but they don't, legally, they cannot, tell you who to use as an arborist. It would be a legal situation because they're selling property.
Well, I guess I mean Cordillera, the development company.
I'm gonna have some suggestions on that in the very last part of which we're getting to soon on call to action. But this is a Monterey oak, also known as the Mexican white oak. Okay. The Forest Service says this is a very resistant to oak wilt oak. Okay.
That's why I planted one.
This is springtime. Okay, you can see a bunch of live oaks dead from oak wilt. Okay, this is a Spanish red oak that got oak wilt from the live oaks. Okay, but this is a tree that got planted because he knew oak wilt was coming, and so he planted this Mexican white oak because it was resistant. And now the Forest Service says it's very resistant. Does that look very resistant to y'all?
Yeah. Not.
9 months. Okay, so I've known this stuff for years and it's been bugging me. And that's why I'm so passionate about it right now. But I've been monitoring these white oaks and seeing what's happening to them and seeing time after time that it is not accurate what they're putting out there. And I don't want this happening to people. You know, there's things we can do to make the situation better, but the first thing that's critical is you have to know what's true. To make management activity based upon that. So that's a 9-month one.
Are you calling the Monterey oak a white oak?
It's a Mexican white oak, also known as the Monterey oak. This is another one, and this is in Burning. We're going to watch a video because this is I've got an actual mortality center, Mexican white oak, right in Burning that I've been monitoring. It's great for getting some data off of. This is springtime and everything's full of leaf and happy. This Mexican white oak obviously put a bunch of leaves on it, but those are all brown now. And it died in less than 30 days. Okay? Confirmed DNA. Oak wilt.
So if you know if you know the fungus is growing because the temperature and the moisture in the air and everything is changing, do you know what type of trees would survive in the current temperature and soil conditions that would thrive so that as our oaks start dying, we can start planting the trees that would thrive?
Now, the last part of the presentation, I'm going to cover some suggestions on how we can deal with, based upon the knowledge I have, what the Forest Service and their oak wilt suppression program needs to do. This is a 14-inch diameter Mexican white oak. It was planted because there was oak wilt in the area, and so they got it in the ground like 10 years prior to the oak wilt actually getting to them or whatever. But it got oak wilt from the live oaks, and as you can see, okay, it put out a huge flush of leaves, right? And then died. Okay, so mortality in under a year on this particular tree. It's in Bernie too. Full mortality. The bur oak. Okay, couple of things. back in the 70s, up in the northern states, where Oak Wilt was first identified by a guy named Brett's, last name of Brett's. Oak Wilt's now called Bretziella fagacearum, not Ceraticis fagacearum. But this guy started the early studies. The northern states have us beat on quantity and length of time of studies on Oak Wilt. Okay. Back in the 70s, they found bur oaks with fungal mats. Okay, fungal mats. A white oak growing a fungal mat. Okay. Here, right now, the Forest Service hasn't changed that. Now, I met with the heads, like I was telling you, I met with the heads and I gave them a whole long list of things that they need to change, and that needs to be one of them. You know, we need to know here that the bur oak may possibly have the capacity to form a fungal mat. So right now, they're just saying that Spanish red or red oak family only can produce fungal mats. So that's not true, and we've known that since the 70s. That's a long time ago.
Explain what a fungal mat is.
A fungal mat is the reproductive capacity of the fungus to infect and spread itself elsewhere. So they form this mass of spores on the trunk as the tree's dying that a beetle goes to because it smells like tree sap, and then the beetle gets covered with these little tiny spores, and then it goes and flies to a fresh wound. Okay, it spreads Oak Wilt that way. So you've got it moving through the roots, and you've got it moving by beetle with spores on it to a fresh wound. But there was a document that was produced between Dr. Apple and who's over there at A&M and Jenny Jesuit, who's the greatest Oak Wilt researcher of all time, period. And she's over in Minnesota. Okay. Quote, other white oak species. Example, e.g., Q macrocarpa. Macrocarpa is the bur oak. Okay, so look, the bur oak is mixed with the fusiformis and the virginiana. Okay, fusiformis is our native Edwards Plateau escarpment live oak. So the live oak's right there. There's some very pretty ones. Okay, the virginiana is the southern live oak, which is predominantly more of what you're going to see over in like Houston and such. But they're live oak. And then you got the coastal live oak too. It's in the same grouping as these guys. No one in the Forest Service is going to say that the live oak is very resistant to Oak Wilt. But they're saying that the macrocarpa is. But the two premier Oak Wilt researchers are putting them in the same intermediate moderate category. They exhibit moderate resistance. About that one, moderate resistance. We know those die 80% of the time or better. They're treating the bur oaks up north so they don't die. Well, you call them board certified master arborists up there in Minnesota, Wisconsin, I don't care what state. And I've got a whole list in here of all these different states and what they say about the bur oak and white oak resistance. It's just like, there's like 14 different places. They say when they get Oak Wilt, they may not die right away, but the end result is they're going to die or you treat them. That's it. You got it. They're going to die or you treat them. And so how tree mortality occurring several years following infection? Like, how did they come up with very resistant on this bur oak? There's no substantiation for it, no responsive information. So I want to know. And so I emailed Dr. Apple like directly, and I said, did they contact you when they made the changes to this website? He said, no, they did not. And he said, I need to look into that. So he gave me that. I'm going to look into that, and I hope to hear back from them. I probably will hear back from them. They understand that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be adjusted. As far as one of the challenges, this is going into the diagnostics. We're using DNA now, but previously we're using, and this is what the AgriLife still does, they only have the capacity at this moment to do what's called the traditional isolation petri dish testing. So they take a sample and then they put it in a petri dish and they try to grow the fungus from that sample to see if the oak wilt's there. But the genetic vascular tissue of white oak does not lend itself to that testing method to have adequate results. So, predominantly up north, they're using field knowledge to make their policies because the diagnostics is a challenge. The tree very well could have oak wilt and you can keep testing it over and over again, but because of the weakness and limitation of the testing method, you can't get the oak wilt out of it. You got to be very careful when you've got a testing, you're basing all your policies off of a limited testing method, whether or not your policies are true. And that's why it's critical that field observation is a start and impetus for all science. And if that's the best you got, you should go with that. So that's, been my argument, but we do have DNA now, and we need to get that going so that we can get a more firm grasp on what's happening. But I'm already certain what's going to happen to a bur oak when it gets hit, a Mexican white oak. I'm certain from my field experience. It's just they need to validate that with testing. So,
Are all oaks then susceptible? Is that
all oaks are susceptible, and so one of my arguments too is I want to completely abandon the usage of the terminology resistance because they've got an association with resistance that's completely 100% inaccurate. Their resistance to them was, minor impact on the tree. And that's just not true. Tolerance, my definition of tolerance is the length of time that the tree can withstand the disease until it dies. That's what they understand up north. They talk about susceptibility and resistance and tolerance in the matter of time frames. So they're like, the most quote-unquote resistant or tolerant tree that we know of in the oak family is the Quercus alba. It's the white oak.
And what's that length of time?
We can't grow that here. It won't grow here. But that length of time, they say they've seen some of them last up to 20 years. But a lot of times they'll die in 3 to 5. And this Dr. Jenny Jeswick, the Great Plains View, and this is what's critical too, is they need to define their terms not only in the matter of science. So if you've got a tree and it's got one sprout on the tree trunk, they're going to say that it didn't die. And it's resistant. So technically, scientifically, yeah, it did resist full mortality. But what I love about her is that she goes on and says, once infected, many white oak species die from oak wilt. Although it infected highly resistant white oak, and she's talking about the Quercus alba, the most resistant of all of them, okay? Even though it does not die from oak wilt, the death of major limbs may render the tree undesirable as a landscape or specimen tree. Well, most people who are planting the trees want a specimen tree. They don't want half the tree or 49% of the tree to die and then still call that a good investment or asset. They want life. They want growth. They want it to get bigger and grow old gracefully and all that kind of stuff. So it's absolutely critical that component or view needs to be expressed in the science of the Texas Forest Service when they're giving people recommendations. So we have millions and millions and millions of dollars invested in these white oaks. You go to a nursery, a wholesale nursery where they're growing tens of thousands of trees, and they're loading trees up on 18-wheelers nonstop every single day and sending them to different parts of the state for them to go get planted, right? The vast majority of those are in the white oak family, and they're growing them because they thought that they were resistant. And they're planting them all in these groupings where 10 years later, you guarantee they're going to be all grafted to each other. And if one gets it, they're going to pass it to the next one. Then the question is going to be, what's going to happen to them? Is it going to be barely noticeable, no big deal, no need to treat? Or is it going to be this? The most resistant oak tree that we know of, dying to such a degree that most people would opt to remove the tree and replant.
Okay, so now that you've got us all panicked, we need to know what to look for, and then like how much time do you have to try and save your tree? That's all I'm thinking now is
Exactly.
call 911.
So on my recommendations specifically on this thing, and I've got a whole lot of all those other pages I showed you we didn't even touch on, and we just barely glanced through this one. The science on the probability of root grafting falls way short. Okay, they've got to change that drastically. The importance of painting is good, and they recommend painting all year long so that the beetle doesn't infect. Here in Cordillera, they've got a prohibition of no pruning between February and June.
Why is that? Why those months?
The beetle activity is highest in the year during that time period. Now, they also say that's when all the fungal mats grow, but the U.S. Forest Service says that the fungal mats in Texas primarily form in the fall and the winter time. So they say the best time to prune is during the winter time. Okay, the reason why the beetles aren't as active is when you have cold spells and wind and rain. They're not very active that day, but most tree pruning that happens in the wintertime isn't going to be in inclement weather. It's going to be in beetle movement weather. Okay, and if you've got more fungal spores during the fall and the wintertime, there's some question about, what exactly is going on. But what needs to be number one is not the paint message. It needs to be find the fungal mat that gives us the reason to paint. You don't treat the symptom. When you got a disease like this, you got to go after the source of the infection. And that's a spore producer, whether it be burr or red oak family, that's forming a fungal mat. You need to find the fungal mat producer and get it removed prior to the formation of that fungal mat.
Yes.
So,
I'm like her. I think a lot of us are wanting to know what the symptoms are, how we can identify the symptoms, and like she said, how long a time do you have in which you can treat that to save your tree? Is that right?
Because now I'm going to be looking for fungal things.
I'm not sure where we are on time. Do we have time for me to do that video?
10 minutes. You got to cut it at 10, okay?
10 minutes and
10 minutes summary. Give us a 10-minute summary and then stop and we'll take
But
questions.
that's not a question
Okay.
that's usually answered, I take.
we have 10 minutes and then a question. Question time. Okay. Well, look on my Oak Wilt page. We just can't cover everything, but I've got to identifying the signs of Oak Wilt. Okay, and I have like 30, 40 pictures of every single species
So we can
on there,
online
and you
find this
can
out.
see all that stuff. So again, one of my main goals is to give y'all some resources on these the Oak Wilt and the White Oak family. Like I said, I've got all these tree species right here. I've got symptomology. An interesting thing is we have tested the white oaks from California. There's no Oak Wilt there, but Dr. Apple did a test for the state of California on their white oaks. He never did it for the ones here in Texas. And I think that's a funding issue. So one of the things I want to cover to you guys is our Texas legislators have let down the Texas Forest Service. They told me they can't afford to hire a doctor who can do all these testings that's needed.
It's the ranchers that don't want to bring down the value of their property, and they don't want to scare the people because there's a lot of development going on, so it's very political. And we understand that it's a really difficult thing for you being in the situation you're in and having the knowledge that you have, but that's the reason why. Boils down to money.
So I think the Forest Service needs more money so they can, go test all these trees. But Dr. Apple tested the white oaks in California, and there was a massive test, the biggest inoculative study test in the United States ever. And it was actually done with the white oaks in Europe because Europe wanted to know how much damage would happen if oak wilt got over there. Okay, so this is a very important test. The white oaks that this guy tested from Europe, they died like red oaks. Less than 3 months, 100% mortality. Okay, and the white oaks in California, they died like live oaks. Okay, so there's a lot of concerning science out there on how white oaks experience this oak wilt too. And that's all on my website, but let me play this video. This is a live oak mortality center in Bernie that transferred oak wilt over a distance of anywhere from 75 to possibly up to 150 feet to planted Mexican white oaks that averaged in between 6-inch in diameter up to 11-inch in diameter. Okay, all 3 Mexican white oaks in this area got it. All 3 of them.
Kevin,
Yes, ma'am.
those that y'all worked on or planted or whatever in Vernon, did you treat them and try to save them under that year?
This is my, I know it sounds horrible, but this is kind of my little test case. Okay, so I knew that there was 2 of the 3 Mexican white oaks had oak wilt, and I notified the gentleman who is head of the neighborhood association about it, and I asked him if I could take samples of the trees, and he gave me the permission to do that. And then I've just been monitoring them because I need the evidence in my case so I can save all the rest of them. And it sounds horrible, but no, we're just watching these die. That's what's happening on this.
So when you treat them, is it guaranteed that the trees when you're
Here's a part 2 time-lapse video. There's no audio description in the original video taken a couple months back. This is the Mexican White Oak Mortality Center. There's a large live oak. It's kind of sort of still alive. It was treated twice. Wasn't treated well with the right products, but this is in Bernie. There's another live oak that's hanging in there. But here's Mexican white oak. You can see the dieback from the top down. It's worse than when I took the photo or video a couple months ago. There's more dieback on almost all the branches. I expect it will continue to decline. Here's a full-size Mexican white oak, definitely the biggest one in the mortality center. More likely the most expansive root system, biggest root grass, but we just turned complete crisp brown, immediate mortality on this one. Supposedly it's oak wilt resistant. Yeah, I don't think so. Now here's the third one. I didn't include it in my other video because there was no symptoms on it at the time. I fully expect that it would get it, and there's branch. See if I can zoom in on it. Sunlight here, but see that leaf margin burn? There's some leaf margin burn beginning on this branch, and a number of the leaves. Mostly a leaf tip and leaf margin
treated at that stage?
Believe that these trees are resistant, don't need to be treated. And if they do get it, you know, as the Forest Service says, they're gonna just have a few branches die and unlikely to graft and all that other erroneous information. But I might be able to come back and do another time-lapse photo, video later showing this one progressively getting worse.
Is it possible
So we'll
to
see.
be preventative and not wait for the disease to show?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, that's the key to prevention is accurate knowledge of what is going to happen and then having a plan of attack. So, you know, one of the questions was, are treatments effective? Treatments are extremely effective. They need to be timed right. So you need to know when the tree is going to get sick, or if it's already sick, you have prompt response, right? So I was telling you on this, this DNA testing, I can take a sample from the tree, overnight it. The next day, they will give me confirmation of oak wilt or no oak wilt, and they can do this thing called the CT value. Okay, and the CT value tells you how much oak wilt's in it. So it'll tell you, is it low pressure oak wilt or healthy, or is it kind of, low pressure as in like weak fungus, or is it high pressure? There's a whole bunch of it. The DNA testing is absolutely critical. And when I send samples over to Texas AgriLife, well, first of all, they're going to mostly give me false negatives because they can't, the weakness of the testing method. Then they're also going to make me wait 4 to 6 weeks for results because it takes so long for the fungus to grow in the petri dish. They don't have enough people in the program to be able to handle the amount of samples that they're getting. So it's just such a slow turnaround. Well, 4 to 6 weeks, you know, like you pretty much missed your window right there. You know, so it's critical that we have this this DNA testing as the normative method for oak wilt testing. But right now, you go to texasoakwilt.org, they only tell you about the AgriLife lab. They're not telling you about Research Associates Laboratory, which is the one I use, but it's a private, and I understand that. But they've got a list of private vendors. I'm on it on the texasoakwilt.org, so I don't see why they can't just recommend people consider as an option the DNA. You know,
What are you doing to actually treat it? Like, what are you treating it with? Or do you bore into the tree or spray it, or what do you do?
So the vast majority of the time I'm doing what's called macro infusion. So I've got a large volume of water that I'm mixing a fungicide by the name of Alamo. It's the very first one that was ever tested. It's the best quality product on the market. And the macro infusion is generally the best way to treat a tree. Now, if it's real sick and it's not drinking real well, you know, that method is not going to work as good because it just won't take up all the product, you know. And so then you go micro injection.
So with your injection, what does it do to the tree? That thing that you put in with water, what is
Ideally, what's happening is the tree during its transpirational pull, while it's doing photosynthesis, it's got a transpirational pull. It takes that fungicide and distributes throughout the tree anatomy, all the way to the tip ends. And that fungicide coats all the living cambial tissue. Okay, and then if there's fungus in there, it's extremely effective at killing that fungus as long as you get adequate distribution. And that's a real critical component. So the best distribution is going to be just prior to infection.
Is it
So
harmful if it's not present? Can they be treated without any maybe indicator, like just being totally proactive?
Good question.
I do not treat trees unless I know for a fact that those trees I'm treating are in imminent jeopardy of infection. The fungicide is toxic to the tree. So the analogy is chemotherapy. You don't want to do chemotherapy if you ain't got cancer. You know, it's absolutely critical. Now, my practices and how I run my business is different than a number of my peers. I'll just be honest with you. I do single treatments, and I only treat if there's oak wilt in the area. And I don't mean like my neighbor 5 houses down has it either. I'm talking about, I know that tree is going to get sick with the disease within 6 to 9 months. The only way for a single injection to work is, it's like swinging at a fastball. You want to swing right at the right time. And it's absolutely critical. Most people are...
Once you get that treatment in that window, what are the percentages? And then so when you do the analysis, you say, okay, it's just at the beginning of its illness, so and we got it in that window, so we can put that injection in there, and it's going to treat it.
For
So there's
live
like an
oaks,
80% chance that it's going to survive.
for live oaks and white oaks, your success rate, if it's done just prior to, and you got the right amount of fungicide, all the things were done right with the injection, you're going to have 85 to 95% success of keeping that tree alive for a long period of time. Rarely does it flare up.
And then, so at what percentage is it too late? Is it beyond 50%? Or is it 60%?
Generally, your success rate's not going to be as good if there's already 30% of the leaves dropped
So
off of it.
30,
But
okay.
there's a difference between low pressure and high pressure, okay? So a high pressure tree, 30% of leaves is nothing, because the other leaves that haven't fallen off, the whole organism is getting bombarded. Literally, you can come back 2 weeks from that point and that tree will be dead completely. So
It happens fast.
low and high pressure are different. The low pressure you can get away with more. And another thing is, are you doing the micro injection or the macro injection? So, and how long, if you do the macro, are you leaving the tanks on the tree? So most people are pulling the tanks the first day, but let's say you hook the tree up and it drinks 40, 50% of the product in one day. Well, it is expending more labor for me to go back the next day, but what if it takes up the remainder in the next day? Right? So that's called like a labor of love, Most of them are pulling the tank on the first day and they're saying it's not going to work, but really begs the question, like, if you do put in the extra effort, are you going to get more fungicide in the tree? It's just drinking it slow. But when they're not sick,
Then you take your medicine a little.
when they're not sick, they'll drink it in about 2-3 hours. They'll drink all of it 2 to 3 hours when they're not sick.
What trees do you recommend that we found here?
So my strong recommendation across the board for the entire hill country is that, if possible, try to keep your oak species. And I'm not anti any oak tree, okay? If you want to plant a shimmered red oak, that's fine. But you want to kind of keep your oak species in the 20 to maybe 35% range of all the trees on your property because of oak wilt. So if you have a high density of oaks native on your property, my strong encouragement would be for you to plant ash trees, elm trees, maple trees, bald cypress, Montezuma cypress. There are 100+ trees of different species that can't get oak wilt, period. Like, hands down, you can cut them with white fungal spores on them, and nothing's going to happen. Okay? And diversity is a great thing, beauty of creation, it's like every tree's beautiful in a sense, you know what I mean? So there's a great need. So my campaign, I'm going to be doing a presentation for the Texas Nursery and Landscape Association this year. And, one of my key goals is I need to convince the green industry, especially the growers, that they have got to start changing and not putting half of the trees out there. Their drive on these 18-wheelers is these oaks, these white oaks. I need to convince the landscape architects that when you are planting the oaks, don't plant them all right next to each other with high probability of root grafts. Space them out so that it's less likely they're all going to be grafted. There's a lot of stuff we can do, but ultimately it's going to require some rules. It's going to require some rules, and we need leadership from the Forest Service. They're the leaders in this program. When they get all these things adjusted and changed, hopefully they'll get some money from the Texas legislature to do the studies they need to.
With all the residents and have signatures. What you need is residents properties that have the trees, we're the ones who are having to treat them, we're the ones who are having to change out the trees. So if you get everybody and do a lot of these seminars and get everybody sign petitions saying, hey, you need to change your regulations and start suggesting that the builders put in and require the builders and the developers to put in these trees, and you have all the people backing, that's what you need.
Yeah, for a couple of years, I was the contract arborist for the city of Helotes. So not only am I a private consultant, own my own business, but I have years of experience in the municipal, arborist. And so I've developed a list of general recommendations and quote unquote ordinances or things for neighborhood association bylaws that they can implement to get the community going in the right direction. Because I think most people want to do the right thing, but they need the direction, and they oftentimes will look to the community leaders for that, But one of my biggest challenges is predominantly they're asking the Forest Service to come give them those directions, and they're not calling me. But I know that there's significant areas that we can improve upon what they're already doing. And, so they made some changes, but they got a whole heck of a lot more that they need to work on. And, right now I'm kind of a maverick on this.
Yeah. You started talking about when it's safe to do your trimming. Now, my husband says, well, it's December, it's okay. Were you starting to say the actual temperature of the day is important and not just winter is okay?
So,
it kind of sounds like
first and foremost, I think the number one concern has got to move from the beetle-centric and paint-centric prevention. Okay, that should not be the number one message, and it is the Forest Service's number one message. The number one message is we have got to find the fungal mats. There's no reason to have any restriction on pruning or any paint if there are no fungal mats. Okay, so that component you don't treat the symptom, you go after the source of the infection. That's got to be the number one. Okay, so when are the fungal mats predominantly forming? That's an important question. And then, when is the beetle active? Okay, and the beetle's active when the weather's good. Okay, so we've had a really mild winter. There's been a lot more beetle activity this winter because of that. During the winter time, when you cut a 1-inch branch, for example, in the winter, it's going to take 3 to 5 times longer for the tree to naturally cure that wound. Okay? When you cut it in the springtime, it cures it quicker. So tree physiology needs to be brought into the whole question too. The best time to prune any plant's in the springtime. You go ask a tree guy in Russia, when's the best time to prune a tree? Same thing in any country, it doesn't matter. Across the board, all expert arborists, we know that spring's the best time to prune. What's absolutely critical is that the person pruning your tree has the right practices. Okay, so I prune oaks straight up. I prune oaks during the springtime. And I do it every year, and I'm going to keep doing it. But I have practices in how I run my business to where the tree is protected. So really, ultimately, is paint effective at stopping transmission during the springtime?
No.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Oh, you
The paint always works.
Okay.
You can trust that the paint. So the Forest Service, when I asked them specifically, well, why do you have this recommendation? Well, they said most people aren't going to paint or paint promptly. So therefore, we're going to make this general rule. There should be no pruning during the springtime based upon a lack of professional or knowledge base of the people doing the pruning. And I said, you shouldn't assume that of people. You should educate them. I said that the ones that don't care, they're going to do it anyways. And so my perspective is it's more critical who's doing the pruning and what practices they have for keeping your trees from getting oak wilt than what time of the year it's being done.
Do you have to clean your tools? Do you have to
It is non-transferable by cutting instruments. Okay, so all infections that occur after pruning, it's due to a lack of painting and not because it's transferred. The disease dies past 87 degrees. So all cutting instruments, chainsaw, pole saw, they all heat up beyond the temperature of that. Live oak, you cannot transfer from a live oak to a live oak. It's spores only. Okay, so they tried putting spores on a chainsaw and on a pole saw blade, and over at A&M, and they tried cutting and all this stuff, and they could never get it to transfer. It's not the cutting instrument, it's the lack of painting.
You paint everything, like for example, if you cut a big limb off, or if you cut like these tiny little shoots, you paint that too.
So a cut like the size of your pinky is going to cure itself in about 5 to 10 minutes, thereabouts.
Those are fine with that, but
If there's 20 of them right next to each other, you've got an accumulation of small little cuts. What draws the beetle is the smell. So a couple of them that size isn't going to draw the beetle. It can't see the oak cut. Okay, but what it can see, it sees with its nose, and so it smells it. So it's an accumulation. We generally are just going to paint everything. Okay, technically you don't have to paint dead wood. Most of the time when we're pruning, we prune outside the branch collar in the dead tissue, so we're not even wounding the tree when we're making that cut. And we let the tree just heal naturally. So the less wounds on the tree is better for the tree, oak wilt or no oak wilt. We don't strip them out to the ends like most people do. I'd say about 7 or 8 out of 10 tree companies are way over pruning the trees. So there's an accumulation of wounds that should never have been there from a physiological perspective to begin with.
Many years ago on the PBS old house, they said never trim more than 1/3 of a tree per year. Are you saying that's too much?
So I generally recommend in the 20 to 25% of live tissue in one pruning cycle, but I wouldn't recommend pruning that much consecutively year after year thinking that that's all right either, you know? So if I'm cutting off a live branch, there needs to be a good reason. There needs to be a defect, there needs to be a disease, there needs to be a pragmatic concern, but you know, like if the branch is growing downward, there's no reason to cut that off. What these live oaks like to do is, you know, you see that one live oak that's massive, 100 years old out in the middle of a pasture, you know, and you see them branches and they're like skidding and bouncing like a snake off the ground way out. That's what the tree wants to do. It wants to, like a mother hen, just protect all of its root soil from any competitive vegetation. So it's like, this is my water. This is my minerals and nutrients, you know, and so that's what they're doing. This is how they were designed to grow. So, you know, growing down is no better or no worse than growing up.
Well, that was interesting.
All right.